The Brandon Peters Show may contain explicit language and detailed plot points. For more information on the show, stay tuned to the end of the episode. And now, here's Brandon.
Welcome back to another week on the Brandon Peters Show. And today, it's time to go all the way back to the beginning. Here to discuss Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life, is the guy who helped launch this show's first episode, Forbes, Scott Mendelson. Welcome to the
Always
show.
A pleasure. Thanks for having me back.
No problem. Thanks for coming back to discuss another sequel from the year 2003. Yeah, but you've kind of,
you're right.
Yeah, you've kind of been on here more than that. You're on the monthly commentary series, though that's out now with Aaron and Abe showing up on our feed. But people get to hear you frequently if they listen to the commentaries. I don't know if people do or not, but and you were part of one of the biggest promo videos. It was where I should have just called it quits on this show because I was a peak. But this is your first return proper, and happy to have you back. And also back for you are like box office reports, like legitimate
actual
movies, yeah.
Box office reports. I now have a choice to ignore the Nielsen lists if I so choose.
Ooh.
I don't have to find a reason to write about why this random film from 2011 is momentarily popular on Netflix if I don't want to. It's nice.
There's money
All
to be
hail
made.
HBO Max.
Yeah.
Ironically.
Yeah, and you wrote recently. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say.
I don't think they were being altruistic, but it did help. I mean, I think, the cushion that HBO Max provided for these films is why they're in theaters right now. Why that Warner Brothers has a pretty conventional, 2021 lineup. And yeah, I think in some cases, the streaming factor is doing some damage to the box office, but I don't know if Warner Brothers, AT&T would have felt comfortable releasing these films if it was just theaters or bust.
Mm-hmm.
Because we didn't know that, if the, especially in America, obviously the vaccination rollout was going to be even remotely successful. I mean, it was a gamble. And it does seem to be that this is a 1-year thing. After next year, they kind of deal with, I believe, Sin World, yes, which is Regal, for at least a 45-day window. So in a skewed way, despite all the hand-wringing, despite all of the what does this mean for everything commentary, some of that came from me, I'll admit. It would seem that AT&T was telling the truth when they said this was a 1-year only desperate times call for desperate measures plan.
Yeah. And yeah, like how long does that symmetry last, do you think? Do you think in the fall it's not going to be as lucrative if you can stay at home and watch it?
I think if theaters do well this summer, I would not be surprised to see, for example, Dune or The Matrix 4, if they open as scheduled, go out just theatrical.
Mm-hmm.
Just as a, it's Legendary wasn't thrilled about Dune and Godzilla in the first place. And I don't know. I think Village Roadshow is behind The Matrix, but please don't quote me on that without Googling first. I know they weren't happy either. So, that might, if they can get away with it, if they can justify it, again, total speculation, that would be a token of goodwill or an olive branch going forward. Because, yeah, I mean, I think as at least the country opens up, assuming things don't decelerate, I do think you're going to have people, wanting to get out of the house. I mean, you're looking at those Nielsen ratings on a weekly basis, and overall the numbers are kind of going down in terms of people that are watching minutes viewed of Netflix, Disney Plus, Hulu, and Amazon. Those are the main ones that are being tabulated, because when people can go out, they're choosing to go out. And, I don't want to be too optimistic about, outdoor entertainment, but I was always very concerned, or at least for the last year, about the companies that were basically making long-term strategies based on a circumstance where if you leave the house, you die.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't mean to be crude about that, but of course people are binging Netflix. They can't do anything else.
Right.
Do I think some of that COVID influenced behavior is going to be somewhat more ingrained? Yes. But I don't think that people who enjoyed going to theaters before all this are suddenly going to go, well, I don't want to ever go to a theater again because I got to watch Without Remorse at home.
Right.
So I do think there will be some semblance of normality, maybe not this year, hopefully by next year. And great super duper irony, if, by the end of 2022, the world has recovered enough that in comes James Cameron's Avatar 2 to announce that movie theaters are absolutely back to stay. Because, God, that would be hysterical.
Oh, that would be. Oh. That would be the way to do it.
But optimistically speaking, I think, again, assuming nothing gets worse anywhere, and hopefully, places like India improve, Canada gets better, et cetera, I do think you have a situation where something like Spider-Man No Way Home possibly performs almost as well as it might have under conventional circumstances. I don't necessarily think for sure it's going to be the first billion-dollar movie since Star Wars, but it could be. And I think of what's left in terms of being, I think that's probably going to be by default the biggest Hollywood movie of this year. It'll have Christmas legs. It'll, be playing, 6-7 months from now as opposed to, next week. And yeah, I mean, I think, this summer is not so much about getting theaters' grooves back, but survival.
Right.
Just, staying afloat and creating, assuring people that it's okay to go to the theaters. And then after the summer, you're going to get Shang-Chi over Labor Day, Malignant, Venom, Let There Be Carnage, Dune, No Time to Die, which, if and when No Time to Die actually opens, we'll know that the storm is somewhat past.
Yes.
Because that's been sort of the symbolic, pandemic era release of our time.
Right.
Partially because, MGM does not have a giant streaming service to fall back on. So they needed, and they don't have the overseas box office distribution rights. Universal has that. So they needed domestic box office.
It's
so
not like they hadn't been
release
offered that. There were numbers going around that was like, whoa. But
there were. So yeah, I am optimistic that we will see some semblance of return to normalcy, either by the end of the summer or closer to the end of the year. And I mean, I don't want to make too much out of one overperformance, but Godzilla v. Kong, I would argue, is doing about as well as it would have done had it opened in normal circumstances last year.
And in this context, they're actually going to get more MonsterVerse films, whereas I think had things been normal, that would have been in question. And
that would have, yes, absolutely. I think it's at like 415 now. It's still got Japan in a couple of weeks, which could go either way. But yeah, I mean, Godzilla King of the Monsters stumbled with a 390. I think had it opened in November 2020 amid a crowded marketplace, I think 415 would have been pushing it, frankly.
Yeah.
And even so, absent the whole, look what we did on a COVID curve, I think even 415, 420, 430 would have been, whew, we dodged that bullet. Not, let's make more of these.
Yeah, because
so I think you're right on that.
It felt like it was going to be the capper, and now they're like, well, we're just getting started, and we're enthusiastically just getting started. So that...
Can you make a Hobbs and Shaw type movie with Godzilla and Kong if neither of them talk? Because that would be my pitch. Do a buddy cop comedy.
Send them to space. They haven't had aliens yet, and that's a common thing with all the old Godzilla movies. So it's time. Well, they've had King Ghidorah, but I meant like the weird alien.
90% of the audience didn't really notice that he was an alien.
Right? No.
I would imagine 90% of the audience were just like, Just another monster.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do think, yes, you're right. Godzilla and Kong fighting flying saucers has a certain, core primal appeal.
Yeah. They're not afraid to get crazy
Especially
with
if you can see the
those.
string.
Yeah. And
No,
and it
you
looks
can't
like
be.
Adam Wingard is going to be the Chris McQuarrie of this franchise, whereas they used to.
Yeah.
So.
Lucky son of a gun.
Yeah.
But he made the right choices for that film.
Yeah.
It's not, Kong Skull Island is still my favorite of the bunch, but
Mhm.
I think, he made a picture that was very newbie friendly, very general audience friendly, and didn't get bogged down in stuff that was not of priority to people that just wanted to see the monkey fight the dinosaur.
Right. And it felt like those old films put to a modern,
Yes.
like he really seemed to grasp some of the goofiness and feel
Yes.
of those some of the wackier Godzilla things. And I'm really happy for him because he's made some good films that nobody went to see. Like that.
Yeah.
Like he was getting constant praise and then nobody went to see him.
Wingard is an interesting scenario where he made a number of original pictures that were low profile, like You're Next and The Guest. But then when he made IP films, frankly, I was not a fan of Blair Witch, and I was not a fan of Death Note.
Yeah.
So when he was hired for this, I mean, I try to go into this with optimism, but still was like, ooh, his track record with the adaptations is not great.
Right.
Let's see how this works out.
Yeah, he was somebody I was always touting for like an Elm Street Halloween or a Friday the 13th movie. Like I felt like he had for that, and they kept putting him with others. I was like, oh, whatever. But this.
Well, and he said this in many interviews, and this isn't original scholarship, but he very much applied his '80s fandom to this picture.
Yeah.
So I mean, he basically turned, King Kong into an '80s burnout, live on a houseboat action hero.
Right. And it's funny to watch that, knowing that and watching it. It's really there. It's hilarious. Yeah. That's what I like. But yes. So
yeah, fingers crossed.
Theaters are back, and after October, we can get back to who's the next James Bond.
Yeah. Good God.
Can't
the good
wait.
News is that by the time it comes out,
they could announce it.
Most of the original contenders will have already died.
No. Yeah. Yes. Well, I was thinking about that. So when No Time to
aged out.
Well, now get it. When No Time to Die was first going to come out, it would have. There was going to be a credit for in memory of Roger Moore. Since then, you could have now in memory of Roger Moore, Sean Connery, Diana Rigg, and you could add Herbert Lom as well. They all passed away since that movie's been delayed. Like
5.5? Is it 5.5 years? 6 years.
6 years
since
Spectre.
Is that right? Yeah, 6.
Yeah.
Jesus.
6 years since.
That's GoldenEye. I mean, GoldenEye was 6.5 because it was supposed to be this summer.
Yeah.
But still, I mean, it's.
Yeah. It's crazy.
There's
so.
be a lot to talk about when that one finally drops.
Yeah.
Because
I
don't
Craig
know what
will
happens.
No longer be Bond. Yeah. Maybe he's refreshed. Maybe he'll do another after it. Like, hey, you guys giving me
years in between. I'll do this till I'm dead.
You guys keep giving me breaks like this.
It's like with Hugh Jackman. You give him 3 years between X-Men movies, he'll never stop.
Mm-hmm.
Give him time to make Les Miserables and The Prestige and The Fountain and whatever.
I just have to wonder
that's what Patrick Stewart always said about Star Trek.
Yeah. Oh, I have to wonder what kind of like unrefusable deal Disney's going to offer him for some sort of appearance in something. I don't know. But
maybe they'll let The Greatest Showman out of prison. Because they basically buried it as soon as they bought Fox. I mean, they were going to be, stage shows and touring events, and Fox, for better or worse, was going to monetize the crap out of that thing. And obviously, we've been in a pandemic for the last year. I don't know, but still, that was even. It's that film basically, is now just a random pick on the Disney Plus network. So yeah, I mean, if I'm Hugh Jackman,
other musicals,
I want Greatest Showman.
So.
Yeah, well, yeah, or other musicals, yeah.
Other musicals. He
loves doing them.
Read through them, yeah.
Like, how about a remake of The Music Man? I'm doing that well on Broadway right now. But yeah, they have to, especially with something where he doesn't have to do a bunch of stunts. I mean,
yeah,
he's worth it. He's worth his weight in gold
Yeah.
because there is a fan base that associates the X-Men not so much with the brand, but with the cast of the first three movies.
Yeah.
You know, Halle Berry as Thor, Patrick Stewart as Xavier, Ian McKellen as Magneto, et cetera, et cetera. And if you can have a way to have your cake and eat it too, you know, and then, you know, I don't know how multiversy they're actually going to be. Obviously, you know, WandaVision was a nice troll move. Good on you for that. I loved when you did it, and you know, they even made him an actor, just like Iron Man 3. That's
Right.
awesome. I love that. I was very impressed with them doing that.
It's good. They still have it. That's good. Good on you, Feige. Yeah. Good on you.
So no, I don't know. But I do think just X-Men, I mean, I'm sure it'll be fine, but I do think there is value in that cast again returning as the X-Men versus just all new X-Men starring today's young actors.
Right. Yeah, they want to act like people don't like those movies, but those were well-liked movies. Well-liked movies. Like and at the time, that was the best we could ask for superhero movies. We didn't know that what other things could be done. Like they were the franchise, and then Batman came back.
Yeah, it was, you know, in terms of, you know, the 2000s in superhero cinema, you know, from, you know, I guess Blade to Iron Man, you know, it was basically Spider-Man. Whoa, way above anything else. Then you got X-Men. And then you got Fantastic Four, Superman Returns, Batman Begins,
Daredevil,
and then
Hulk,
you got basically everything else.
Yeah,
yeah, that's even a lower down where, you know, you're thrilled to get to 250. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see what the industry looks like when A, things get back to normal, and B, a lot of these franchises like Mission Impossible, like James Bond, either come to an end or they go through a major transition. And I don't know what the answer to that is.
Right. Keep being weird, DC. That's
anyway,
all I ask.
I'm rambling.
So,
yeah, dear God, please, yes.
Keep being weird. All right. Well, we'll move on.
For God's sakes. Cut Ray Fisher a giant check so he can move on and do other work.
Right.
I'm not unsympathetic, but I also selfishly want to see him in more movies.
Right. So. Yeah. All right. Well, we will move on to Tomb Raider: The Cradle of Life, which is directed by Jan de Bont, written by Dean Georgaris, on a story by Stephen E. D'Souza and James V. Hurt, starring Angelina Jolie, Gerard Butler, Ciarán Hinds, Chris Berry, Noah Taylor, Djimon Hounsou, Til Schweiger, and Simon Yam. In this one, adventurer Lara Croft goes on a quest to save the mythical Pandora's box before an evil scientist finds it and recruits a former Marine turned mercenary to assist her. All right, this one I picked, but it's a classic Mendelson tale here. As we've mentioned before, the Tomb Raider trap comes from this specific movie. The Tomb Raider trap is basically when a superior sequel comes out, but because the first one was so blah, it fails at the box office and kind of dampens things out. So Scott, 2003, did you go see this in the theater when it came out?
I did not. I was guilty as charged. I thought Tomb Raider was abysmal. It was clearly hacked to bits in the editing room. It barely had a coherent story. It seemed pretzeled in a way merely to justify John Voight showing up as Laura's father, which obviously that's Angelina Jolie's father in real life. Most of the action scenes are basically her shooting at CGI creations, which if you have human characters that are fun, you know, The Mummy Returns was a month earlier, and was a lot better. But it was well marketed. It was a relatively new property, so it wasn't like you were going after nostalgia. It was probably the most expensive, or one of the most expensive, if not the most expensive, live-action video game movie of ever made at that point. And it was an unusually canny example of actor plus character as a franchise package. You had Angelina Jolie, who just won an Oscar a couple of years ago for Girl Interrupted, and was certainly even if she wasn't quite a butts in the seat star yet, she certainly was somebody that everybody knew.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of, if I may be blunt, a relatively attractive young woman like Angelina Jolie playing a famously attractive video game character who also was, a professional ass kicker, which was part of Jolie's, screen persona. Again, it was a perfect fit.
Yeah, nobody
in the same way
complained.
that
Like with that
no,
cast,
I mean,
everybody's like, oh, and that was what
it was
lived
Jack
on.
Nicholson as Joker perfect.
Yeah.
And it was sold as that. And it opened with $47 million. Back when that was not one of the biggest openings of all time, but it was pretty darn good, especially for a non-sequel.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, 47 million. A year earlier, X-Men had broken the record for a non-sequel opening with 54 million. I don't know if Tomb Raider was second, but it certainly was up there.
And that's a team versus one person. Right.
Yeah, exactly. But the movie was terrible, I think. I mean, whatever. And it was a classic example of what I call the quick kill blockbuster,
mm-hmm.
which is where a well-hyped and anticipated movie opens very well because people want to see it, but they don't like it. So it sinks like a stone, but it opens so well that even a rapid-fire descent is enough to make it look like a hit. The classic example of this was Batman Returns. I love Batman Returns. A lot of people listening to this probably do.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're old enough to remember, that film broke the opening weekend record with $47 million back in 1992, but then dropped a then huge 49%,
mm-hmm.
was out of the top 10 in 6 weeks, and finished up with 162 million domestic, partially because audiences either weren't crazy about it or it made their children cry. Because it was a much darker, more macabre, more intense, more graphically violent movie with a lot of sexual innuendo. It was a film that earned its PG-13, even if by default a lot of parents probably thought, hey, it's a Batman movie, it's okay for kids.
Mm-hmm.
Relatively speaking, it was not. So that came out in 92. You had other examples of what I would call quick kill blockbusters. The first Mission Impossible, which again I like, but was very confusing to a lot of audiences because you actually had to pay attention.
Right.
If I sound snarky, I apologize. I'm still bitter about that.
No, me too. Because I remember leaving the theater. I was like, people confused. I was like, wait, it made sense. Like, what was?
Yeah.
Yeah.
People were very tripped up by the visual exposition where Tom Cruise is explaining what happened to his fellow agents, and he's saying that Kittredge is the killer, but we're seeing in his mind that John Voight's character is the killer because he's talking to John Voight and doesn't want to give away his hand.
Yeah.
Again, it's visual exposition. But anyway, and that was a film that opened with a then record $75 million in 6 days, counting Tuesday previews,
mm-hmm.
but then flamed out with 181 domestic. Still a huge hit on a $65 million budget. It did like 450 worldwide, so it's still a massive hit. But again, that was an example of a film that opened so high that it didn't even matter if anyone liked it or not.
Right, yeah.
And that was what basically, and by 2001 with Tomb Raider, that kind of performance was par for the course.
Yeah.
You were almost betting on that. As that summer, or slightly earlier if you count Hannibal, 2001 started to see a huge upswing in massive opening weekends.
Mm-hmm.
We can debate why that was. I'm assuming it's something to do with, demographics. You had a generation that came of age that was old enough to drive to a theater and buy their own tickets. You had a nationwide multiplex industry that had basically finished all the remodeling and the stadium seating and the digital sound, yada, yada, yada. But you started seeing films that were anticipated, but you'd think not breathlessly so, like The Mummy Returns, Rush Hour, Planet of the Apes, flirting with, $70 million openings. And then, by the end, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone would break the opening weekend record with $90 million, and then it was off to the races. But I'm rambling. If you want to cut a lot of this, I won't blame you.
Oh, no. This is why we're doing this movie.
Tomb Raider flamed out, 47 million, does 131 domestic. And I think about 275 worldwide on a $130 million budget. It's still a hit, so we get another one.
Mm-hmm.
But 2 years later, Tomb Raider: The Cradle of Life, you have A, people didn't like the first one. B, people were really only kind of curious the first time around.
Yeah.
And since the first one didn't knock their socks off, they weren't necessarily making a lifelong commitment. So unfortunately, summer 2003, The Cradle of Life, which I think is a far superior picture, it's basically, it starts as a remake of Raiders of the Lost Ark and sort of segues into a Roger Moore James Bond picture
Mhm.
before ending as Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is such a perfect finale for that kind of movie that Last Crusade gets ripped off quite a bit in National Treasure, Dora the Explorer, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
It follows that structure where the hero is forced by the bad guys to go through the trials to get the treasure in order to save loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And it opened with about $23 million. It ended with about 65 million domestic, 156 million worldwide on a $95 million budget. So it was a cheaper film. I apologize. I was mistaken. The first Tomb Raider cost 115, not 130. I apologize. This one was cheaper. I would say probably because they had a lot less CGI because it was more practical stunt work, practical action scenes, fisticuffs, stuntmen falling off cliffs to their death, which is always cool. And yeah, it was a flop, and the franchise, as we know it, we did not get a third one.
Well, they wanted to make a third one, but Jolie didn't want to come back. She was happy. She thought that they hit what she wanted to with this film and just wasn't interested in returning, and that kind of halted everything for a third one. Because this one, it's got a smaller budget, but it's also an international production. There's a lot of companies attached to the money for this one. So it wasn't like the studio was just like, here you go. It was like we have to scrounge up money from all these companies to do it. And they had done it again for a third one, thinking that people would find out that this was better. And Jolie, I think it was around the time the movie premiered, publicly said she wasn't coming back and this was the one she wanted and was done. And that kind of just stopped everything from going, from my research.
Huh. No, I absolutely, obviously I believe you. And yeah, she's doing more, slightly more, she had done a Mighty Heart in between those two. I think, was that before or after? I apologize.
That was after.
I know that was a Daniel Pearl picture.
Mighty Heart was a couple years after.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was 2007. I'm sorry, because I watched that with my first kid.
No, but another thing with that summer, why people wouldn't have gone to Tomb Raider, they were getting that kind of action in Pirates of the Caribbean, which blew up that was the movie of summer 2003.
Oh, yeah.
So why go to
in a weird way
Tomb Raider when you got pirates?
In a weird way, Pirates of the Caribbean breaking out the way it did. And I've always felt that was one of the defining franchises of New Hollywood. Harry Potter, Spider-Man, Shrek, and Pirates. In terms of, these big, blustery, effects-driven fantasy, you're the special action-adventure franchises. And the way that film just either clobbered the competition or, held its own against, say, The Matrix Reloaded. There were a lot of practical action films that summer 2003. Tomb Raider, Bad Boys 2, Hollywood Homicide. Obviously, there's a lot of special effects in Tomb Raider 3, but there are also a lot of, car chases and fisticuffs and shootouts and things of that nature. Same thing with The Matrix Reloaded. Yes, there's a lot of CGI, but there's a lot of stuff that's real.
Right.
Or at least is intended to look real.
Yes.
So in a weird way, that was, to me anyway, and especially in retrospect, summer 2003 was sort of the end, sort of the finale of Hollywood relying on these practical action pictures, even at the A-level blockbuster level. Because the next summer you've got Shrek 2, iRobot, Spider-Man 2, and then by 2005 you've got Batman Begins, Fantastic Four, War of the Worlds, Revenge of the Sith, and so on and so forth.
You get also,
and then you get more and more fantastical.
Was it 05 Sahara, which people rejected? It's the kind of movie they all nowadays want, this Indiana Jones adventure practical effects. And I skipped Sahara. You told me, maybe we'll talk about it in the show sometime. You were like, hey, you should check out Sahara. And I watched it. I was like, holy crap, that was really fun. Like, that's those why we go to the movies type blockbusters, and nobody cared. No, and that
To
could
be
have been a
fair, it
franchise.
cost 130 million, which is a ridiculous budget for that kind of film,
Right.
especially in that environment. But no, I still am a fan of Sahara. I think
Mhm.
it's very good. But yeah, I think in retrospect, 2003 was sort of a curtain call for quote unquote real world or real world plus, in
Pure
cases like
action.
Terminator,
Yeah.
action and adventure pictures being the A-level blockbuster. And you started to see more fantasy films taking the lead. And this was even before comic book films became a huge thing.
Mhm.
Because honestly, they didn't until 2008, 2000,
Right.
even 2012, 2013. And comic book movies really didn't start dominating way above everything else until really the 2015 to 2018. I don't
Yeah.
want to say the Trump era, but that's basically what it was.
It wasn't until like post Avengers. I mean, because Thor and Captain America came out, and I was like, well, they did fine. They didn't take the world by storm.
Yeah.
It was the Iron Man or Batman, and then the
but
sequel.
even Iron Man, that summer, that movie made less on about the same budget, give or take, as Hancock, Kung Fu Panda. Obviously, it was much cheaper, but it made less. It made less worldwide than Mamma Mia.
Right.
That movie made $609 million. It made only $5 million less overseas than both The Dark Knight and Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Insane. Yeah.
The classic example of what we always talk about, of how it matters what movies are successful, but it also matters what is perceived as successful.
Right.
And a big problem is often when a female-driven picture like Mamma Mia, like Twilight, becomes a huge hit. It's sort of taken as a fluke, an exception to the rule. Well, when something like Iron Man makes 585 million, it's like we should reshape the entire industry around this.
Right. Taylor Kitsch is gonna happen. Damn it! Oh, his new movie made a couple bucks.
Yeah.
Yeah, that type of
Spoiler: he did not happen.
No, he didn't.
But yeah, Tomb Raider came. It was not a success. And frankly, I like it more than a lot of people. It's not like it got rave reviews or anything, but I think it is a very good action and adventure film that uses its video game tableau as seasoning.
Yes.
Yeah, there's stuff that's kind of feels video game-ish here and there, but it's not bending over backwards to be a video game movie.
No, and it really,
as opposed to something like Assassin's Creed.
Yeah, it takes like the big difference between this and I watched both of them for this one. The first one, you can only like win off of Jolie's charisma and excellence of the role for so long in that movie, and like the movie starts on a phony beginning of the training sequence with robots and shooting and blah. This one we actually started on a mission. And I think DeBont is the big difference here because we get a like travelogue James Bond movie for the body of this. Like you like you can see the places you're at. The locales change. They're interesting. He films them better. He's a cinematographer. That's his background. So that Simon West did the first one. And as we've seen through his career, Con Air is kind of a fluke. But Con Air is not really a pretty film either. But
no, that was entirely cast. That's not fair. It was well produced.
Fun side note on Simon West: he was the director of the Rick Astley "Never Gonna Give You Up" video before doing.
I did not know that.
Tomb Raider. But DeBont apparently did not like get an awful time on this film. And it sounds like problems people might have today behind closed doors because Marvel and Disney never have any problems. But he said there was a lot of people telling him what specifically things had to be. This character had to be in it. All the video games.
Simon West or Jan DeBont?
DeBont.
Okay, sorry.
He said they were video game people making decisions to a point where he just had to throw his hands up in the air with a lot of it. And he said Jolie, while he butted heads with her, he really appreciated her and she was really involved in wanting to make a good film overall and was very into taking leadership kind of qualities with it. But this is it for him. This was his end. I mean, sadly, it's a run of Speed 2, Haunting, and this movie, which none of them big success stories. And before, if people aren't familiar with Jan de Bont, he was a known cinematographer doing Die Hard, Black Rain, Lethal Weapon 3, Cujo, Flatline, like In Demand. He also filmed Roar, that batshit crazy Tippi Hedren lion movie where they actually acted with the loose lions, and Melanie Griffith got her face ripped off and had it have it. Yeah, watch Roar and you'll just be like, oh my gosh, these people are crazy. But that's the Bond, and I think he's the different. He's why this one. Plus, I mean, it's a better story too, and he wants practical effects, stunts.
It has a story.
It has a story. Yeah, but and it is a lesser budget, but I think it's only really noticeable in that submarine scene where it comes up from the water and you kind of get way too close and they can't really pull it off. But they right from the beginning, having her pull up on the jet ski, just looking at the boats, going into a cab, like the first one, when they go into caverns and places like that, it feels like you're sitting in the audience at like the MGM Hollywood stunt show or something like that. It's like,
yes,
really kind of fake. This feels more a
and to
little
be
more
fair,
natural.
the one good action sequence. Sorry.
No,
I was saying the one good action scene in the first one is the stunt sequence in her house where she's, bungee jumping all around the house fighting bad guys.
Right. Yeah, and watching
sorry,
this.
I did interrupt.
No, it's fine. Watching this, it's a shame we didn't get 5 Tomb Raider with Jolie movies. But she was nominated for a Razzie for this, which is just utterly stupid. It just goes to show, like, oh, a movie with a big star bombed at the box office, so we're gonna give them a Razzie because who cares about the performance? I guess it's bad.
To paraphrase Garfunkel and Oates, Jolie will never have sex with you, no matter how many Razzies you give her.
Right.
Anyway, they have a massive crush on Amanda Seyfried. It's very funny.
Yeah,
she's never gonna reciprocate. Let it go.
Right.
But no, it feels more like what you'd think a Tomb Raider film would be, which is basically an Indiana Jones type adventure with a dash of James Bond that happens to be with this IP. Because, I mean, what is the video game if not, at least the initial version? The reboot's another conversation. But, the original video game was basically Indiana Jones, but it's a woman.
Right.
And, that's a video game. They don't have to, they don't have to be super, deep in that sense. And it was frustrating. The first film, again, to me at least, it felt very pretzeled for the purpose of doing some kind of weird family reunion between Angelina Jolie and her estranged father. Right. They were like mending fences in the movie, and that's great. But
on Golden Pond via Tomb Raider.
Yes, exactly. And frankly, and this was before I knew who he was, but Daniel Craig is incredibly dull as a love interest in this picture, in the first picture.
Oh, yeah.
But in the sequel, you've got, Gerard Butler looking incredibly young, by the way. My God.
Right. Oh, yeah.
He gets carded in bars in this movie. And he gets to use his natural accent. When he gets to use his natural accent, he is a good actor.
Yeah.
So it's a more exciting picture. It's a more intriguing picture. The action scenes are better. The character work is better. The production values are more fluid. As you said, it feels shot on location. It feels like a living, breathing adventure.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel like something was made in a computer badly.
Right. And it feels like it's not, I mean, they have that sequence where they jump off the building in those suits, and that's an actual people jumping off in the suits. It's impressive. Just really cool, like James Bond stuff that you see in here.
That's very James Bond. It's an action scene entirely for the purpose of, here's this cool gadgets that we can show off.
Yeah.
And it's us really doing it.
Right.
And I love the little bit where they're sort of I don't know if they're bungee jumping, but they're jumping down and rooting bad guys as they're falling down. And the bad guys, or at least the mercenaries, I don't know if they're villains, they're both falling in tandem with them. And again, it's real stuff, it's real action.
And the one time they go heavy on
I don't mind CGI, I don't mind special effects, but I want to be fooled. I want to be fooled.
Right. And the one time they do lean on that, it works. It's the sequence where they're walking and those monsters come out of the dark and
Yes.
get everybody. And they set stakes. They make it scary, and they pull it off. It's the only thing that feels like something like where it's related to the first movie in any way, aside from being too.
It's also an example of the mind returns kind of stealing its thunder by having a very similar sequence a couple months earlier, or a couple years earlier.
Right, that's true.
But go with what works.
Yeah.
And again, that sequence is very short. It's not they don't anchor the entire climax around computer generated monsters.
Yeah,
it's still a personal fight between Hines, Jolie, and eventually Butler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And talk spoilers.
Yeah. Oh, spoilers all over the place. Yes.
Yeah, and the movie ends with her making a very decisive decision to kill her friend because her morals are more important than her relationships. And that they actually did have an alternate ending in case test screening audiences rejected it, where it was more accidental, more explicitly self-defense. But to test screening audiences' credit, they went with the actual ending where, yeah, he's got a gun, but she plugs him before she even knows he has a gun.
Right. What? And then they have their MacGuffin is so much better. The Pandora's box. Indy had Ark of the Covenant.
Yes.
They have Pandora's box. That's a cool thing. People will be like, well, all your mumbo jumbo about what this is and what it does is fine, but I know what a Pandora's box is. It's a crazy thing, and that's all you need to know to get there. And it's a
scary box that opens and kills people.
And I did at the beginning when he was talking about Ebola, the most deadly virus known to man. I'm like, wait till he gets to 2020.
Well, I love that sequence where he poisons the snitch. Again, that's a very James Bond villain.
Yeah.
The film does a very good job of balancing, Indiana Jones and James Bond in a way that feels coherent. Yeah. And obviously, Indiana Jones was sort of a ripoff, don't remake, franchise born of James Bond. But nonetheless, they're not identical. So there does take some skill to blend them accordingly.
Right. I think what they did here also is kind of similar to Rian Johnson's approach to The Last Jedi, where instead of them saying, what is Tomb Raider in this video game, they're like, what informed Tomb Raider the game? What helped make Tomb Raider what it is? And therefore you get a more natural Tomb Raider feeling thing that's also exciting as a movie. Whereas, like with Rian Johnson, JJ went for what Star Wars by looking at Star Wars. Rian Johnson said what Star Wars by looking at what George Lucas was looking at when making it, what informed him, and then adding his own little touches of what he liked. And he got what I consider the best Star Wars film that has been made in my lifetime.
Even, Solo, that I don't love Solo, but I like Solo.
Correctly, yeah.
And I think Ron Howard, partially being of that generation, it's one of the few Star Wars films that very much feels as just an ode to,
well, Kazdan too. He's an old school guy.
Serials that, inspired Star Wars, including car culture.
Yeah. I mean, there's plenty of Casablanca in Solo that I noticed, and I'm just like, wow, that's
and
pull it off.
Again, I think it's fine. But I think it's noteworthy the extent that he's able to do that in a film that still often feels like a Wikipedia entry.
Yeah. Well, I don't think any of that comes from. I have a hard time believing Lawrence Kasdan wrote a script that had Darth Maul showing up at the end. Like,
and again, I don't necessarily blame J.J. Abrams for everything that went on with Rise of Skywalker.
No.
I mean, maybe it is him. I don't know, but. Not to get into that debate again, but even the Abrams films that I don't like are generally well made.
Right.
In a way that Rise of Skywalker was not. Ergo, I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm getting off the subject.
Back to the Tombs franchise. Gerard Butler here, hungry Gerard Butler. This was around the time he was in Dracula 2000. That was like his notable one, and he was going around telling people he was going to be James Bond in what ended up being Die Another Day. That he wasn't James Bond in that movie, but there was that.
That would have been interesting.
Because I remember that.
Instead, Daniel Craig was James Bond. Wrong Tomb Raider movie.
Wrong Tomb Raider, dude. But you mentioned Daniel Craig, who is just odd in that movie. American.
He's just a
and-
non-entity in the film.
Yeah. Yeah. It's,
And again, obviously he's an excellent actor, and I'm inclined not to blame him, but he's a plank of wood in that film. The point where they have so little chemistry, where at the end of the film, where he gets, stabbed and she goes back in time to save him, was like, I didn't know she liked him that much.
right. I guess she feels sorry for him.
I don't buy that.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah. In this one, I mean, there's Jamin Hansu shows up. This is when he was starting to be plugged into everything, kind of changing their scenarios just over and over again. There's a lot of, I think, a lot of good scenes that they take cues from Indiana Jones. The between adventure scenes where they have a lot between Jolie and Butler, or Jolie and somebody else, that really work. They keep her out of her house a bunch, which we saw plenty of in the first film.
This is not a bottle episode.
Yeah, not a bottle. But yeah, they start with something that has its own opening sequence scenario, and it's not a gotcha trick thing. They take her to interesting, but there's that interesting, even just smart fights, like the one where she fights, I forget his name, the leader of the Asian gang, when she fights him with all the statues, and then she fights him with a rifle, a beret rifle, doing moves that are like in the
British service
moves, and that's a really fun fight. And there's nothing, I don't even think there's anything that fun in the first movie. I don't even think the high wire thing's that fun in the first movie as that sequence, and that just showing how little of a thing is even way better than that first movie.
I mean, it's the first Tomb Raider was an unusually bad summer blockbuster, in frankly a summer with a lot of really bad summer blockbusters.
Oh yeah, it was Planet of the Apes, and yeah.
I like The Mummy Returns. I love Shrek. But when A Knight's Tale is one of the best big movies of the summer, that's not good.
Yeah.
I would argue that, even Tim Burton made what I would argue his first genuinely bad movie with Planet of the Apes. So yeah, it's yes, I've been down on Tomb Raider, but it's not, it wasn't just, oh, this is disappointing. It felt to me like a perfect example of what, this is what blockbusters are going to look like in the over-reliance on CGI era.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings, especially Lord of the Rings came along. I was like, no, it's okay. Things will get better.
Mm-hmm.
That film was, in a skewed way, that film kind of saved my optimism for blockbusters after. And honestly, I think that's one reason why Spider-Man was such a big hit the next summer, because after a summer filled of terrible, terrible blockbusters, not only Spider-Man was really good, and it was really good in a character-centric way. It told a story. It had, real character development and arcs and action that kind of sort of looked, you could believe your eyes. Again, CGI, not CGI, whatever. It felt like a real movie. It felt like a full meal after a summer filled with what I would argue half-hearted films like Swordfish, Pearl Harbor, Tomb Raider: The Cradle of Life.
Right.
I'm sorry, the first Tomb Raider.
Right.
Rush Hour 2, which is enjoyable, but there's not much there.
Well, Spider-Man's a weird thing where it, I think the second one, Raimi Spider-Man at least, feels like it's a rare occurrence of feeling like a real movie, feeling like a comic book, and feeling like a pretty loyal to its source material comic book at the same time, and you feeling like a Sam Raimi movie. Like, I don't think we see that a lot with Marvel. They're doing their own thing, but it's a different era. And the DC movies kind of have tried. They want that feel of what the Raimi Spider-Mans were doing, but per their whoever's making their film. But the Spider-Man's a really weird, rare thing looking back now that we don't get, that doesn't quite happen. Like Ang Lee's Hulk tries that, but to lesser. Like, I'm more liking the thought of Ang Lee's Hulk and stuff than every time I sit to watch it. I'm like, I like what this is wanting to do and trying to do, but it just doesn't always work for me.
But
no, I think this is a Tomb Raider: Cradle of Life's a fun film. I don't watch it all. Do you go back to it all the time? Ever?
Um,
Like
no, I watched it once 3 years ago. I watched the other two before the new one came out,
yeah,
and then I watched it this morning for this podcast.
right.
Um, Speaking of the new one, I mean, if that's worth bringing up,
Yeah, sure.
I liked it.
Yeah.
I think Alicia Vikander is very good as Lara Croft,
Mhm.
and I wish to God they had just skipped the origin story and gone straight to the, this week on Lara Croft's adventures.
Yeah.
I think they're gonna, again, will it avoid the Tomb Raider trap with Tomb Raider
Yes.
2? I don't know, but I certainly think the sequel has the potential to be a much more enjoyable picture because it's not dealing with Lara Croft's origin and her daddy issues.
Right. And the Tomb Raider, the reboot one, they had Walton Goggins, and it felt like they just didn't get anything out of him. Where normally
Yeah.
he'd be the person we're talking about. Like, oh my gosh, he was so great in Tomb Raider, and it was just kind of pedestrian for a Walton Goggins.
Yeah, but he's a guy that almost steals G.I. Joe Retaliation with one scene.
Right.
But no, I did enjoy the last Tomb Raider for what it was, but I and maybe that's a part of an issue with a lot of franchises where they don't get it right until the sequel, but
well, they're too hesitant to hold everything back. They're like, well, we don't want to get there yet. We want to make your damn movie, whatever you want. I miss writers just going for it and then dealing with what they wrote them into the corner the next time and seeing how they did. That's why I love the damn slasher movies. Fascinate me because they didn't give a shit. Like, I don't care. I'm not making the next one here. And you get a writer who's like
And the funny thing is, who does that? Marvel, more or less. You think, they drop Loki off an interdimensional portal in the first Thor, like, isn't he supposed to be back for the Avengers? Who cares? We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, Chris Nolan's Batman films do that. They scrapped, even before Heath Ledger died, they scrapped their plans to have basically Dark Knight and Batman 3 be like a glorified two parts. Like, nope, I'm leaving it all on the table.
Yeah.
We're dealing with Harvey Dent now. He's not going to be his own villain in his own movie because he doesn't need to be. I mean, it's fine.
And that's what I liked about. I always praise Aquaman. Like, that felt like we might never get to make another Aquaman movie ever.
I don't know what they're going to do for the sequel since there's like 800 movies in there.
Yes.
And every time I watch that, I watched it quite a bit in quarantine because A, it's awesome, and B, my kids like it because there were examples of them in good taste. Every time I watch that movie, I'm amazed that it's not 3 hours long, and I'm amazed that it didn't cost $1 billion because there's so much movie there.
There is so much. I like James Wan's direction on movies, and it's all there. Like, it is a lot of movie. Like, you can't fault Aquaman for not going for it.
An acquaintance online referred to it as Costco the movie, and I like that.
There you go. Yeah, that's perfect.
It's got everything in bulk.
Right. But yeah, the new Tomb Raider was it was mostly guilty of being fine. Like, that was the problem. And
in a non-event, an event-movie driven era, fine is not enough.
Yeah, and this movie, Cradle of Life, has a pop that movie could use. Like, that's this movie's Cradle of Life isn't perfect. It's not like a great movie, but it's got a sense of fun. It's got I don't know, like a kind of just a charm that's a little lacking from the we want people to take this seriously type.
Yeah, there's a certain we have to make it grounded, and and part of that's the video game itself.
Yeah,
which was rebooted as sort of more of a survivalist origin story.
Right.
But the other thing with the Cradle of Life, and I would say the same thing about Rise of the Silver Surfer, which is that it's not setting up anything.
Right.
It just gets to be a standalone story.
Well, that's when you could do those back then. You could do that back then.
Again, I think to a certain extent, I wish they still would.
Yeah.
Because again, the franchises that work, generally speaking, the sequel does do that.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that nobody shows up because you spent your entire first movie doing building blocks.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when you make a better second installment, like Angry Birds 2, like Tomb Raider, Cradle of Life, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Out of the Shadows,
mm-hmm.
Oh well, you blew your curiosity factor on a movie that was very bad, and now you've lost the audience that didn't like the first one, and you've lost the audience that was only curious, that might have shown up for a second time if the first movie was good.
Right. Yeah, no, that's true. Are there any examples of pre-Cradle of Life Tomb Raider trap movies that you can think of offhand?
I would say Addams Family Values. I am not a big fan of the first Addams Family, and frankly, it didn't get particularly good reviews when it came out. I think generally we all agree that Addams Family Values is a vastly superior picture.
So devilishly fun. Yeah.
You lost the curiosity factor because it's not, oh, wow, it's an Addams Family movie. That's pretty cool, because you had one of those 2 years ago. And you had I saw the first one and it wasn't very good. So
if you want to hear more on the Addams Family, tune back to the Brandon Peters show from last November, where I and Sabrina Graves talked over it. And I was very excited when she picked that. So yeah. Addams Family. I want to put not so much the first to the second one. But they were trying. So Friday the 13th, A New Beginning really took people down. And then part 6 was very good. The Jason Lives, but I think it was too late in that one's box office.
Isn't there another slasher series we can think of where the 5th one was terrible, and then the 6th one was friggin' awesome, but nobody showed up because the 5th one was terrible?
Yeah.
We're talking about Saw for the record.
That's true. That's true. And then remember with Saw, they were like, well, I guess for the last one, the 7th one, we're gonna hire that 5th one's director again. And then they read the internet and were like, oh no. So that was crazy because they got the guy from the 5th one and they're like, you're going to direct Saw, the final one. And then they realized, oh, people like 6. They want. So then the guy who had done 6 signed to do a Paranormal Activity sequel, but due to his contract with Saw, they could pull him back anytime. So they pulled him from that Paranormal Activity sequel, had him do Saw 7, and fired and got rid of the guy they were like, it's a mess to get to that mess of a movie. That was.
That's literally your career suffers because you did well.
Yeah.
And remember, for 10 seconds, where Brian De Palma was going to direct Paranormal Activity 2.
Oh, was there?
That would have been. Maybe it was. I mean, this is movie gossip from a decade ago, but I do remember that at one point.
I mean, he and Coppola aren't the legends anymore that in their filmmaking today. They kind of get to make what they want nowadays, which is really interesting. But on a budget, but that's what they wanted to begin with back in the 70s. So they're in an odd way got to where they wanted, but not maybe how they foresaw they would be doing.
I certainly hope, and I say this with zero criticism, I certainly hope that whenever Coppola and Lucas hang out, that Coppola says, so you're going to make one of those experimental movies now?
Yeah.
Eventually. Still going to do it, I swear. Totally going to, eventually. But yeah, another example of, in mid-series, Star Trek. Now, Undiscovered Country did not bomb. It did about as well as Star Trek 2, 3, and 1, 2, and 3, give or take, and eventually Generations. But Star Trek 4, The Voyage Home, was the first one to hit 100 million domestic.
Right.
And Star Trek 5, which was not well received, only did about 50 million in the summer of '89. And then Star Trek 6, they went back and they hired the same guy from Star Trek 2, who made what I would argue is my personal favorite Star Trek, The Undiscovered Country. And again, it was not a flop, but I would argue it would have been a bigger hit had Final Frontier not been so disappointing.
Yeah, and it probably got a bump from being the last one for the original crew. That was possibly. But then Star Trek 2 didn't do as well as the motion picture.
It did a little bit less. Because Star Trek 1 wasn't terribly well received. I guess that's certainly an example.
It's a good story, a positive story of the Tomb Raider show.
Well, the joke is that they reused, Star Trek 2 was $15 million because they reused all the sets from Star Trek the motion picture
and footage. They had plenty of footage of the ships just floating.
The first, Robert Wise motion picture was incredibly expensive. It was $40 million back in the 70s. But
what's the funny thing is they with that one nowadays you make Star Trek like it's Star Wars, but back then Star Wars was the hit and they decided to just make straight Star Trek as a response.
It's people were expecting Star Wars and they got 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
Now I think motion picture is aged very well,
Mhm.
partially because it is so different from the other Star Trek films.
Right. Yeah.
In a way, very similar to the Saw franchise, actually, where you have the first film that really feels very different from the sequels that would follow.
Oh yeah.
And then you have the second film, which sets the visual and narrative template for the franchise going forward.
Right.
And then you have a fifth film that's lousy, and then a sixth film that's terrific, and then a seventh film that's it's sort of a finale, but not really.
Right.
Sort of a handing of the torch for installment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then in
Generations.
Jigsaw, they all fight the Borg.
Right. Yeah. They all did. Yes.
You have a Hoffman going.
So
The line must be drawn. Here,
Spiral is
no
Insurrection.
further.
Spiral is their
No
Insurrection.
spoilers, but yes.
Where it's like a 2-part TV episode and.
Which means Saw 10 is going to be a piece of absolute garbage, written and directed by somebody who hates the franchise and made to look like a Conjuring universe film because that's what's popular right now.
There you go. Oh my. Can't wait. Can't wait. All right. Well, that's all we got for Turmeric Cradle of Life. I'll move on to what else? This is where, yes, go see. Well, rent it or buy it or.
Paramount Plus for free if you're so inclined.
And on 4K Ultra HD Blu-ray if you own one of those, so you can grab that. That's how I got it for review. So
if you live in a household where you can get unfettered access to the television for 2 hours.
Yes, very true. Yeah, this movie gets out early. It doesn't have to be 2.5 hours. All right. So
but 117.
Yeah. So this is what else is where we talk about anything else we've taken in recently, seen, maybe a piece we wrote, listened to an album, whatever, anything. So Scott, what else?
Is this dropping in a few days?
This is dropping on Monday.
Okay, so no embargo. I saw Jason Statham's Wrath of Man.
Okay.
It is fine. The only thing I will say about it is that for what it's worth, the marketing is a lot less spoilery than you'd think. There's stuff that isn't even hinted at in the marketing. It's a more complicated picture than I was expecting in ways both good and bad. It is incredibly violent. It is pretty mean. I mean, it's not, it's not about a dashing action hero that rights wrongs and protects the innocent. But it still feels like why is Guy Ritchie doing this movie? There are Guy Ritchie bits and pieces here and there, but it does feel like Guy Ritchie signed on for what would otherwise be a very conventional Jason Statham action picture. For what that's worth. And I did, in anticipation, I did rewatch King Arthur for the first time since theaters.
Oh.
The first 20 minutes and the last 20 minutes of that movie are very good. The middle hour and change is terrible. And I don't know who is to blame, but it's a tragedy.
Gotcha. So my what else, and since you're here, I wanted to bring this up because I know you keep up with it too. I wanted to talk about the state of affairs for the CW Arrowverse at this time. Like, this has got to all be coming to an end, right? Like, right now, so Supergirl's on its final season. Black Lightning ended. I didn't even realize that was. I had not kept up with that one too much. People are leaving show like The Flash. I mean, Grant Gustin, I have read multiple times is wanting to be done. I know the actor who plays Cisco's leaving the show. Tom Cavanaugh's leaving the show for Flash, and it's quality. And I feel like we're gonna be. I feel like they're gonna close everything, and we're gonna be left with Smallville again. Like that's it. It began out of the end of Smallville, and then Clark and Lois, or Superman and Lois.
That's actually really ironic.
We're back at Smallville.
You should write about that.
Yeah. If it comes to
pass. I think, without, behind the scenes stuff notwithstanding, I think they shot themselves in the foot setting up Crisis. It left it had Arrow ending on a whimper.
Mm-hmm.
Because the entire final season was doing building blocks for Crisis on Infinite Earth.
And a pilot that never isn't going to happen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Flash was running, pardon me, running in place for the first third of this half the season, and then it had nothing to do with the second half of the season. Supergirl came off a fantastic fourth season.
Right.
was also running in place for a while. And then, and this isn't Crisis's fault because from what I'm gathered, the creators, they asked the Supergirl showrunners, well, is there anything you want me to fix? And they said, well, we could bring Lex Luthor back. No. Terrible. I love Jonathan Cryer. It's not remotely his fault.
Mm-hmm.
Terrible idea. Having him as a villain of the week has sapped that show of all of its urgency.
Yeah.
One of the best things they did was bring him on for like a handful of episodes.
Yeah.
Have him be a foil to Lena Luthor, an established character with a history with everyone. Give her someone he knew to bounce off of, and then kill him off at the end of season 4.
Yeah.
In a way that adversely affected the character arcs of the cast of Supergirl.
Yeah.
And it's I feel terrible, but I have to force myself to watch those this year.
Yeah, no, it feels like like Flash came back and where they had to pick up from where they left off with the last season, and it felt like they were like, let's hurry up and get the hell out of this. Like it would, and it's been stumbling around, and it just it feels like we're in that post Steve Carell leaving the office period where it's like, and of all the people, Steve Amell leaves, and it's like, oh, we thought maybe we could rely on all these people, and for some, not that he shows crossover every episode, but he leaves. We're like here, and it's kind of like that year I watched Smallville, and I realized I'm not in the demo anymore here because Clark moved back to Smallville. It got all high school again. The Flash has these new characters they're throwing on us. I'm like, I guess they're with everybody.
Well, I agree. At the end of the day, I'm a 41-year-old man, and maybe this isn't my cup of tea anymore. And frankly, one of my ongoing issues with pop culture as it exists is that in order to work and thrive in this industry, I have to pretend that I care about all these properties that, for all intents and purposes, I should have grown out of 10 years ago.
Right.
That's not to say they're not individually good, but I shouldn't have to pretend that I'm still excited about another Batman movie.
Right.
I shouldn't have to pretend to be excited about, the Mighty Ducks coming back, or, I mean, it's a lot of the Disney Plus stuff that, it's, and to be fair, there's a lot of people in my field that are noticeably younger than me, and that's fine.
Mm-hmm.
If you're 26, you probably like Saw 4 because you saw it when you were 15.
Right.
And I don't judge you. I will be fascinated to see if generational nostalgia for Saw 4 allows Saw 5 to be a bigger hit than it otherwise would be.
Yeah.
And it's but yeah, as far as, and the other thing is especially with the Flash, in which the main characters, they're adults, they're not kids anymore.
Yeah.
And yet the kind of adventures they're going on, the kind of lessons that they're learning still feel like, what you'd learn when they were barely above Dawson's Creek age.
Right.
Jesse L. Martin, God bless him, doesn't need to be there to give them life lessons anymore.
No.
What's his name? Tom Cavanaugh as Harrison Wells does not need to be there to be their mentor anymore. They're our age, frankly.
Right. Well, it's funny. I was talking to my sister. I'm like, remember when we used to just be in awe of Jesse L. Martin every week, and now it's just kind of like, oh, it's old Joe. It's old Joe there. He
has no. I mean, obviously, I'm not going to root against his gainful employment, but he no longer has a reason being there, and it's weirdly, I don't want to say embarrassing because that's too hard of a word, but he doesn't fit in there anymore, and it's weird watching him go through the motions.
Yeah.
I think it's telling that in Supergirl and The Flash, the two best episodes so far this season were basically flashback time travel episodes involving generally new characters that are much younger than the core cast.
Right. And Batwoman, that's just uninteresting city to me. Like
they shot themselves in the foot by not letting the new person just be Kate Kane again.
Yeah,
that was ridiculously.
And then bringing Kate Kane.
Yeah.
Why did you? Like, I was hoping. I thought Batwoman would have a huge moment that would say something in culture of you're a role, you can be recast. We have too much reliance on a facial recognition. We need to be more like British stuff where it's like it's a part. It's not a person, it's a part. Someone else can play Iron Man down the road. People have played Batman. People have played James Bond, Doctor Who, like all this stuff. It's a part. So they don't look exactly alike. That's fine. It's a part. Like Roseanne, they replaced Becky on,
Yeah. I think that's what Marvel's trying to deal with in setting up these established characters as, still, taking over the mantle of the IP.
Right.
So now Sam Wilson is Captain America. And that's okay because we like Sam Wilson.
Right.
Or, I'm guessing the Iron Art TV show is going to set set the course for what basically be an Iron Man 4 with that new young actress whose name escapes me.
Yeah.
And I think that's that's a solution. If it works, it works. But yeah, Batwoman, geez, I don't know what. And I said that when they made the announcements, like bringing a new actress, that's fine, but you're setting this poor woman up to fail.
Right.
And the show's probably, ratings wise, it's a disaster.
Yeah. And Legends just came back, and that
even they're losing all their people.
Yeah.
And I adore that show.
I do too. I think last season suffered crisis-wise. It took Katie Lotz out of their production too much, and she's really she's one of the best things about the entire Arrowverse. Everything she mixes with people very well. She's a strong character on that show. The best movie they had was to bump poor Rory from Doctor Who. I can't think of his name right now, from being the lead of the show and making it to her, and everything has rippled out from that, and that became like the best show. And then you took her out of the equation last year, and then she was blind and all this stuff. And but that show has a lot of fun. That's the only one that I have potential that maybe can bounce back because it's so weird and can be different things all the time. So
that is the one left that I eagerly watch.
Yes.
That it's not just a matter of obligation / curiosity / well, might as well see this to the end because it's almost over anyway.
Right. Yeah. So it's just really weird.
But yeah, to get back to your original point, Supergirl's leaving, Arrow's gone, Black Lightning. I'm guessing when Flash ends, that will be the end of the Arrowverse as we know it.
Yeah.
Which is ironic because I always, I've joked or not joked about the Flash movie taking so damn long to actually get made that the Flash TV show would be over by the time it came out. Now the entire Arrowverse is going to be over by the time the Flash movie comes out.
I think they'll try to eke one more clean, proper season out of Flash where there's no COVID production problem. Got to finish one season, start another, and they'll call it a day. Because I've heard Gustin, they've tried to re-up with him, and he's no. They could always bring Walt the show, but yeah. And
I understand that COVID messed with their finales, but the seasons were lousy before that.
Yeah, it's not like it probably saved them.
I mean, maybe it deprived them of a clean start, but it's not like Hero season 2 was kicking ass before the writers' strike.
Right? Yeah, that's true. The Weepy Twins season,
but
yeah.
But whatever, they had a hell of a run.
Yeah, it's impressive. It's as impressive what they did on television as what Marvel did in theaters with those.
Yes,
those programs.
I would agree.
Definitely. And I think people also too are getting movie quality things from those heroes on the Disney Plus now, and it's changing things.
They're still on a TV scale, more or less. But the production value, what you do get is of a feature film caliber of TV size set pieces, if that makes sense.
Falcon Winter Soldier has some impressive action sequences while still
the opening
a lot of TV crutch.
The opening aerial action sequence in Winter Soldier was fantastic.
That would have been great to see on a big screen.
I don't think it ever. I don't think they even tried to top that, and maybe they don't have to because it's TV.
Right.
But
definitely. So Arrowverse, yep. You just kind of see the end. It just feels like the end is coming, and now I feel like I'm chore watching them. But I did It was beloved shows when it was starting, like beloved. Like
Oh,
I
yeah.
was,
And it's and again, I'm conflicted. Like, is this? And I'm kind of glad I've heard you say this because I don't feel like trashing the shows on Twitter just for whatever. But
Mhm.
I mean, am I just too old, or is it just not good lately?
Yeah.
Probably a little of both.
Yep. Well, but my children are still enjoying The Flash. That's the only one they
Yeah.
watch right now. They did watch Supergirl for a bit, and then they just kind of lost interest, and then it got really good. Poor them.
Yeah, season 4 was fantastic.
Season 4 is one of the best seasons of the Arrowverse. Like
Yes, I would agree with that.
it's where it
I
had
would
something to
absolutely agree.
say and wasn't pulling punches. Unlike
Yeah,
Black Lightning would come out trying to say stuff and then pull back a little bit and go back to high school drama. I'm like, no. That's kind of why I gave up on that show. I was like, like their second season of Black Lightning kicked the door down. I was like, oh, they're gonna really get into stuff, and then it became high school drama again. I was like, oh, well, we had an episode,
Yeah.
didn't we? So, but Supergirl, that fourth season, really, I was like, shoot, I couldn't believe how bold they were going. I mean, Supergirl was always pretty bold with the social stuff, but that was
it was almost so timely. It wasn't fun to watch.
yeah, that's true. That's true. Okay. Well, hey, that'll do it for today on the show. Scott, thank you for returning and hopefully not creating a
Very
Terminator
welcome.
trap of guest spots here. So just let people know where they can keep up with you.
Forbes.com, the ticket booth. Just Google some variation of Forbes, the ticket booth, Scott Mendelson, and I will pop up.
All right. And I'm on Twitter and Instagram at Brandon4KUHD, written work at YSOBlue.com. There's more from the Brandon Peters Show this week. But until then, always remember to keep the positivity in your online film chatter.
Thank you for listening. The Brandon Peters Show is a Creative Zombie Studios production. Produced by Brad Shoemaker and Brandon Peters. Written and edited by Brandon Peters. Announcer vocals by Jessica Alsman. Theme song by Metavari. Web design and show art by Brad Shoemaker with Brandon Peters. All music and clips featured in the episode are property of their respective studios and no infringement is intended. Additional information on this and other episodes at BrandonPetersShow.com. For any inquiries, press opportunities, or sponsorship, contact mail at BrandonPetersShow.com. The show is available on Apple Music, Spotify, or anywhere podcasts are found.